Okay, thank you everybody so much for joining us. I see we have 11 or so people with us right now. Please do share this with your friends. We have been wanting to produce a program like this for a really long time, actually even before the war started recently. So we just saw this war as like an impetus, like we've got to get this information out right now. Today, we are going to be tackling the topic, what should Adventists think about Israel? Should Seventh-day Adventists support Israel? Today, we have Dr. Alexander Bolotnikov with us, who is the director of the Hebrew Bible Institute. You can learn more about the Hebrew Bible Institute by going to learnhbi.com. I am the associate director for that organization, which helps Adventists understand the Jewish people better, and especially the Jewish culture behind the scriptures, so we can understand the Bible, especially the New Testament, better. And we also have with us today Alan Reineck, who is the Director of Public Affairs and the Religious Liberties Department at the Pacific Union. Thank you so much, Alan, for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Rachel.
Yeah, somebody asked me recently, they were like, why don't you just do like, should Christians support Israel? Why are you doing should Adventists support Israel? And like Pastor Sasha was telling me earlier today, most denominations, at least many of them, believe something very different to the Seventh-day Adventist denomination when it comes to eschatology, last day events, and in relation to Israel. And most denominations that view Israel as the center of many prophecies support Israel because of that. We don't share those same prophetic beliefs. And so we don't support Israel because we believe all the Jews need to move back to Israel because the Messiah needs to come, that we don't support Israel for that reason. What are the other biblical reasons that we should be supporting Israel? And that's what we're going to be tackling today. Sasha, I would love for you to start us off. Our first point here that you wanted to tackle was replacement theology. Does the Adventist Church, or just Christendom in general, replace Israel? Where do we get this idea from?
Oh, this idea is very old Christian idea. Some scholars ascribe it to Saint Augustine, the the founder of the Catholic theology, one of the founding fathers of the Catholic theology, who lived in the 5th century. And it's basically a very old idea that Old Testament is written for the Jews, but the New Testament, that's already no longer Israel. It's the church which replaces Israel. But when we go into the book of Jeremiah, we see a different picture with regards to how the new covenant is made. In the book of Jeremiah 31:31, it says, and I'll read it in New King James Bible, it says, "Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah." So the prophecy is definitely showing that even though Israel was not faithful, it says, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them. So it says they broke the covenant and God was faithful. That's true. But again, what we see here is we see God is making the new covenant also with Israel and not with somebody else. He's not taking any other people's group to make a covenant. He does not scrap Jewish people altogether. He is making a new covenant with Israel and Judah. And Romans 11 verse 1 is clear about this. It says in Romans 11:1, I say then, has God cast away his people? And the answer which Paul gives, certainly not. And when it says his people, what it means, Paul explains, for I am an Israelite.
Okay, so what you're saying is there has been a historic understanding that God cast aside the Jewish people because they rejected the Messiah?
Yes.
Let me jump in here, Rachel, because, you know, anti-Semitism is at the root of so much of this, and we tend to read the Bible through our own bias and prejudice, right? So for centuries, you've had the accusation that the Jews killed Christ, that God rejected the Jews, and the New Testament testimony is absolutely contrary to that. The Romans killed Jesus, as it's very clear, and the early church was entirely Jewish. It's just what Sasha quoted from Romans 11 was so basic that Paul says emphatically, no, God has not rejected his people. What I think we need to understand is that, where God's purposes were carried out through a nation for the period of the Old Testament, after the life and death and ministry of Jesus, God's purposes were now bigger than a nation. So it wasn't just about a nation, but it wasn't that God replaced the nation with the church. The core, the remnant, if you will, of faithful Israel were joined by Gentiles and became a called out community that was larger than a nation. It didn't mean that the people were rejected, but God's purposes are now expanded. Is that a good way to look at it, Sasha?
Very important statement. One of the biggest problems which we have in our understanding, especially Christian understanding, is that the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, was about people, one ethnic group, which this is how they define this as, it's for the Jews only. That's why even many Christians today, many evangelicals today, they say, Sabbath is for the Jews only. This is the Jewish dispensation. But, and I can hear a very similar overtones in some of the Adventist presentation of the Old Testament. That's why we need to see, for example, how the people of Israel was created. First of all, we see in Exodus chapter 12, when people of Israel are ready to leave Egypt, it says, a mixed multitude went up with them also. So quite a few non-Jews and left Egypt with them. Many Egyptians, many other nations who accepted the Lamb of God back then at that night.
So Sasha, what you're saying is that after all the miracles that God performed through Moses and all of the plagues, that actually succeeded in getting the attention of people other than Jews, and other people could recognize God's hand and said, hey, I want to go with this guy. I'm going to worship this one. He's the one for me, right? And I mean, but you look at Isaiah, a house of prayer for all peoples. This has always been God's purpose. Isn't that right?
Exactly. So this is absolutely theologically, biblically incorrect to have the idea that Old Testament was for only one ethnic group. So, but what we see is very important. We see all these people of different nations joined into Israel. In fact, when it says in the book of Exodus how one should join Israel in the Exodus, they had to circumcise their males. They had to eat that Passover lamb together with Israelite family. So you're integrated to Israel. So, and what you say about the Isaiah, everybody is coming to the temple of the Lord to worship God on the in Jerusalem on the Holy Mount. So this was God's plan in the Old Covenant to bring everybody to the Lord through Israel. So Israel was that central hub, and the other people were like a spokes, and they would just come into Israel. But it was never like, oh, Israel only, and that's it. You know, one nation chosen, the other one are neglected.
So what you're saying is the Gentiles truly are grafted in along with the Jewish people instead of replacing the Jewish people.
Exactly. The same thing happens under the new covenant. So when we look at the Sinai, the old covenant was built upon the foundation of 12 tribes, which means 12 children of Jacob. Well, when we look at Jesus, we see he chooses specifically 12 apostles, which correspond to 12 tribes of Israel. Basically, this is, to show that the continuity. This is why when I hear sometimes the phrase spiritual Israel, this is not a biblically correct phrase. Based on Jeremiah 31, we are dealing with the Old Covenant Israel and the New Covenant Israel. The Old Covenant was based on the 12 sons of Jacob. The New Covenant was based on 12 Jews who were closest disciples of Jesus and called apostles.
So we use this term, though, a lot, like spiritual Israel. What's that then?
That's more of a traditional, artificial form. We do not have that kind of statement in the Bible.
Wait. Let me just make sure I understood you. Did you just say that the term spiritual Israel is nowhere to be found in the Bible?
No, you won't find this particular term or statement in the Bible.
But we find, I guess, the concept.
The concept that we have in the Bible is found in Galatians 3:29. It says, and if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's seed. So we have a concept of adoption. So you have Abraham, people of Israel, and then you have other people adopted, which
it's very interesting that you bring back this issue of adoption. I don't feel like we talk about that enough in Adventism. It's sort of like replacement theology is like the parents adopt the kids and then the kids take over and they don't have any parents anymore.
That's exactly the problem. I really like what you said. This is exactly the problem. Because the replacement theology is basically turns the adoption process on its head. You know, children take over, not the and become parents, and parents are no longer. But the adoption is you have, and of course, in adoption is you accept the family and you become the part of the family.
You become part of the family, right? Now, why are you bringing this up as issue number one in relation to Adventists supporting Israel? Why is it important for us to understand the fallacies of replacement theology? Are you insinuating that replacement theology has led some Adventists and other Christians to reject supporting Israel because they rejected the Messiah? We've taken their place. They're not that important anymore.
I believe
pretty much. And let me speak to this because, I really feel strongly that we have some misconceptions about, Jewish success or failure, right? And let's go back to our understanding of Daniel 9 and the 70 weeks. So the traditional Adventist understanding is that, God gave the Jews a time period to get their act together, and at the end of which they blew it and God was finished with them. They failed. And that's not biblical.
Well,
That's
then who's
not
going to take our place then? I mean,
that's not what the text says at all. And in fact, if you want to look at, what it was that the Jews were chosen, why were they the chosen people? In fact, they succeeded magnificently in all of the key areas where they were chosen. So let's count them. Number one, Jews received the knowledge of the one true creator God, the monotheistic God, and they were chosen to preserve the knowledge of the one true creator God. Have they done that? Absolutely yes. Number two, they were chosen to receive and to preserve.
Wait, Alex, some people might disagree with you on that. So can you spell out clearly how they fulfilled that?
For thousands of years, Jews have borne witness to the idea of a single God, not many gods, one God. I mean, it's not really debatable as a matter of historical fact, right? It's central to Judaism. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and strength. This is something that Judaism and Jewish people have preserved from time immemorial. Number two, Jews were chosen to receive the inspired messages of the prophets and to preserve their writings for all time, to the fact that the scholars tell us that really the scriptures have been preserved in pretty good shape. Considering the passage of time, what we have today as the various manuscripts, we have so many manuscripts that we know we have a very accurate, collection and text of what it was that God inspired the prophetic writings that became, both the Old and the New Testament. So the Jews have succeeded in preserving these writings. And number three, and very significant for all Christians, certainly, is the notion that through the Jews were to give the world the Messiah. Jesus was a Jew. He came and lived as a Jew. He died as a Jew. And the early church was largely Jewish, and certainly in the earliest times was almost entirely Jewish. And the book of Acts records the extent to which literally thousands of Jews accepted that Jesus was the Messiah, including a very large number of the priests themselves. So to say that the Jews somehow did not, failed in terms of giving the world the Messiah, I mean, it's if you believe that Jesus is a Messiah, I don't see how you can hold.
The problem is a lot of Christians look at Israel today instead of reading their Bibles in relation to did Jews accept Jesus or not. In fact, when it says that Jesus was baptized, it says all of Judea came out to be baptized. Like that's a lot of people. And we know just scores of thousands and thousands, 3,000 on Pentecost. Those were Jews. Like, I just feel like the reason why people think that the Jews rejected Jesus is because, roughly only 250,000 Jews today believe in Jesus. And there's, how many millions? So yeah, we're a minority today, but during the time of Jesus, like, we started Christianity.
Well, and there's another whole show to do as to why it is that Jews have not flocked to the church. Cliff Goldstein wrote an article years ago about how throughout most of Christian history, it was completely absurd for Jews to join the church because the church required Jews to give up the Sabbath, to give up the Torah, to eat pork, right, and to go to church on Sunday. And that just made absolutely no sense to Jews that, this is how you worship God. So, there's a lot of history there to unpack.
And there is more to it than that, and more complicated, because in fact, quite a number of Jews, even in these circumstances, were joining the church, but how were they treated in the church? That was the biggest problem, because again, we go back to this theology which originated in Catholicism back in the 5th, 6th century, the theory of Jews being cursed. And, the Catholic Church stopped believing in this theology after Second Vatican Council in 1962. But some of the churches, including, unfortunately, some Adventist preachers, they still believe that Jews are a certain cursed nation. And of course, the biggest problem which these kind of attitude does is for those Jews who are actually believing in Jesus, and first of all, those Jews who are Seventh-day Adventists, particular, because basically they are the ones who continue to hear these messages. But
so Sasha, let me do this, because if we're going to talk about are the Jews cursed, we have to deal with the scripture where when Jesus is on the cross, there are those who are calling out and saying, his blood be upon us and upon our children. And they essentially call out the curse of God. Now, at the same time, after that, what does Jesus say? Jesus prays, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And my question to those who believe that God heard the prayer invoking God's curse upon, his blood be upon us and upon our children, which prayer do you think God answered? Did he answer the curse, or did he answer Jesus' prayer that the Father forgive them?
And why would God bless? Why would God curse a whole nation because of a prayer of a few people?
But we have the scriptures that say, in the Hebrew scriptures, and Sasha, you probably know the verse. Though Noah, Daniel, and Job were in the land, he could only save himself. And the answer to the other scripture where it talks about, the fathers eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. Right? The notion in scripture is individual responsibility and accountability, right?
Yes. One of the biggest problems that I see, why especially, and I'm speaking here only for Seventh-day Adventists, why some Seventh-day Adventists tend to see Israel as cursed. This is not the problem. We always among us addressed it as anti-Semitism, and it's not anti-Semitism as much as the serious deep issue in the lack of assurance in salvation, because those who preach that Israel has been punished and banished, and cursed and rejected. A few moments ago, you, Rachel, noticed, okay, if God replaced Israel with the church, whom is he going to replace the church with? And that's the problem, because this is the approach. God is rejecting the sinner. And so Israel in this kind of theology is used as a poster boy. See what God has done to them? Now, if you don't shape up, then you are going to receive the same punishment and banishment from God. And so the way how, like you started, Alan, with Daniel 9, and this is the problem. When we read Daniel 9:24, let's say I'm reading it in the New King James Bible, it says 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring the everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So
all things that the Messiah did. This is not something that Israel did. It's something, it points to the work of the Messiah.
It's deeper than that. What is erroneous in the interpretation, which I often hear, they forget about the holy city. They say people. So people must finish the transgression. So it's like ticker starts. Okay, it's another 490 days. You gotta become sinless. And that is exactly how today we have some of these theories of last generation perfectionism. There will be a time, if you're not sinless, you're gonna be lost. So this is where it's taken, and all this. But when we look at the so the conclusion is made after 70 weeks are done, and then of course we have the stoning of Stephen, and they say, oh, since Stephen is stoned, they have not finished the transgression, they have not ended the sins, they have not reconciled for iniquities, and have not brought the everlasting righteousness. So done with these Jews. Well, usually I'm a mathematician. I like math. I'm not mathematician now by any sense, but I was trained in high school as a mathematician. And when you have an equation and you have x, which you need to resolve, what is x? After you come up with an answer, you have to then test it. You put the x in the mathematical equation and see if you.
So what are you saying?
What am I saying? Let's test if God actually rejected Israel. The best way to test this interpretation is to look at the book of Acts. And I am very much surprised how, when I hear this replacement theology preaching based on Daniel 9 interpretation, I don't know why people cannot see the Bible, because in the Bible it's clearly stated what specifically happens to Jewish people after the stoning of Stephen. That's, I haven't invented it, but when we look at the book of Acts, chapter 11, verse 19, then we read, now those who were scattered after the persecution that arose to Stephen. So here is the persecution. The disciples, and by the way, these disciples are Jews to begin with.
Right.
Let's not forget about this, because those who were in Jerusalem, 5,000 were baptized after Peter and John made miracles in the temple, and many, many thousands of more were baptized in Jerusalem. So when Stephen was stoned, because of course they had an opposition. In fact, believe there was no Christianity then. It was just internal Jewish problem. Those who believed in Jesus and those who did not believe in Jesus. So
Right.
those Jews who rejected Jesus, got very jealous because another Jew by the name Stephen converted quite a few priests, and they were upset. So they decided to kill him. So it was an internal Jewish problem. That's how the book of Acts is described. Now, what happens next? So they traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, preaching the word to no one but the Jews only. So apparently, right there, we see that the interpretation of Daniel 9, in which we say, after 490 years, when Jews stoned Stephen, God is no longer preaching to Jews. That's wrong because of Acts 11:19. They continued to preach the gospel to the Jews only. And then,
well, I think, Sasha, to be clear, at least what I was taught was that at the end of the 490, that's when the gospel went to the Gentiles. But you point out that that's not really biblical, that the gospel continued to go primarily to the Jews first.
yes,
But that was always, I mean, Acts chapter 1, before Jesus ascends. He tells the disciples, you will receive power and you will be my witnesses in Judea and Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the earth. So it was always to the Jew first and then to the Gentile.
that's true, because what is happening here and why we have this confusion, because we don't understand the history of Jewish people during the Second Temple time. And during the Second Temple, only 30% of entire Jewish population actually lived in Judea. The 70% lived across the Roman Empire. And that's why you have this Cyprus, Cyrene, which is basically Libya, Phoenicia, all these places, and Jewish communities were there. And so how do we have Gentiles joining? Verse 20, but some of them, of the Jews who were in diaspora, they were men from Cyprus and Cyrene, that's why we call them diaspora, who, when they had come to Antioch, spoke to Hellenists, preaching the Lord Jesus. So only after some time, when the message came to the city of Antioch, then Greeks began to join in larger numbers. So what we have mistaken is, as I said, in Daniel chapter 9, we focused only on Jewish people and forgot about the holy city. What Daniel 9 is given as a 70 weeks, it's given it to the holy city, to this old covenant theocratic Israel. But the fact that old covenant theocratic Israel ceased to exist doesn't mean that the gospel is no longer being preached to Jewish people. And that's
Sasha, let me stop you and reflect on what you're saying, because I think it's really, really important here that in Daniel 9, the significance of the holy city and the fact that the 490-year period is carved out not just for the people but for the city. The significance of the city is that it represents the nation state of Israel. It's the center of
theocratical
theocratic
state of Israel. Theocraticals, that's very important. Because
and so clearly, I mean, it's pretty clear as a historical fact that God's work after the cross expanded. It expanded beyond the scope of the nation of Israel, right? And that's what you're saying was what was prophesied, was that the theocratic state would be replaced in God's plan by the called out community. The word, as you and I discussed, the word church is actually not biblical.
That's correct.
The Greek term is ecclesia, which means the called out ones. And the called out ones at the beginning were almost entirely Jewish. So it wasn't anything to do with rejecting the Jewish people, but it was a transition in, it was, as you said, it was always God's plan that the gospel, salvation be for all, but not just Jews, that, the nations as well. But now there's a shift in how God's working.
So you're saying, to wrap this point up, one reason to support Israel is that they are our parents. They are our spiritual parents. And we, as their children, did not take their parental space, their parental spot. And it's important as Adventists and just as believers in Jesus and in the scriptures to recognize the Jewish nation as our parents, so that they can continue to preserve those scriptures that point people to God. Which brings me to our next point, Sasha.
Wait a minute, Rachel. I got to just jump in here, because I'm going back to the 10 Commandments here. Honor your father and mother. I love this metaphor. And yeah, if we have this understanding that, God, that the Jewish people are really in a parental relationship to the church, and then it behooves us to show respect and appreciation, right? To honor where honor is due.
Yeah, basically, what you were saying is great, because by supporting Israel, we are supporting Jewish people and supporting the fact that even though we are no longer into the stage where there is a Jewish or Israel theocracy, that was replaced. So the theocratic, instead of believing that Jewish people were replaced by the church, biblically correctly is to say that Old Covenant theocratic Israel was replaced by those who were called out, the ecclesia. So the 12 called out were the apostles. That's why Jesus called them. There is every single gospel has it. Jesus calls the 12, like it says in Matthew chapter 8. He calls the 12 right after the Sermon of the Mount. So they're first called out, and they're all Jewish. So by supporting Jewish people, we basically acknowledge the facts written in a gospel in the book of Acts, that what we know today as ecclesia is the society of those who are called out, and their in basis are Jewish.
Two quick observations here, not to get us off track too much, but there is a revival today in America of a kind of an interest in theocracy, of dominionism, and a very dangerous heresy that is returning to this notion of theocracy, really. But as some know, you both know, because Sasha, you've done radio with me when I was doing my Freedom's Ring show for almost 25 years. When I would have Baptists on the show, I would acknowledge consistently that we Seventh-day Adventists owe the Baptists a debt, because we stand on their shoulders when it comes to our understanding and our commitment to religious freedom. They were developing these concepts before we ever came along, and we were greatly influenced and kind of picked up on a lot of Baptist foundations. Well, in a similar, and I say that because in a very similar sense, we as Adventists really should be acknowledging that in our theology, in our religion, we owe an enormous debt to Judaism. That we are, no, we're not just, lock, stock, and barrel kind of the same or building on Judaism, but we're very much building on foundations that were developed over, centuries within Judaism, and now Adventism comes along very late in the game, but we owe this enormous debt of theological depth and understanding and spiritual realities that we have a heritage. We didn't just come from nowhere. We owe a debt to Methodists and to other, Christian groups that kind of were instrumental in our founding, but even more so going back to the roots, as it were. We owe an enormous debt to Judaism. And for us to just kind of say, oh no, that was replaced and now we're it and they don't count, is just so disrespectful, and it's theologically unsound.
Yeah, theologically unsound, that's for sure. It's interesting. I just think it's hard, I think, for Seventh-day Adventists to respect the spirituality of Jews because of this negative. There's feedback again for some reason. This negative view that the Jews are not godly. It's almost like when you adopt your kid, and then you hope and pray that it goes well, and then that adopted kid comes in and with a gun and threatens the parents. It's just like yeah, I think we definitely need to have a change of mindset to have more respect and appreciation for the Jewish people. And I think it's one reason why Jews struggle, even those who are curious about Jesus, they struggle to visit our churches and to tell us about their curiosity about Christ, because they have a premonition, a valid one, that they will be demeaned in one way or another. And I'm not saying that Adventists hate Jews. They don't. But there is this negative stigma attached to the Jewish people. And I'm glad we're covering some of this right now. One question that I wanted to touch on is the significance of the state of Israel in Adventist hermeneutics. There's other reasons we should support Israel. Sasha, you gave me this topic earlier and we discussed a little bit over the phone, and I really loved where you were going with this. Why should Adventists support Israel? And you believe that one of the reasons Adventists should support Israel is because of hermeneutics. Break that down for us.
Well, hermeneutics is how we approach the reading of the Bible and interpreting the Bible. And there are two significant strands, trains in biblical hermeneutics today. One is called historical grammatical, and the other is called critical. Historical grammarians, they look at the Bible text as is. They look at the Bible story in Genesis and they believe, okay, Abraham is the real person. Moses, who wrote this, was the real person. Everything is reflecting the real history. King David was the real person, as well as King Solomon, and Joshua was the real person. So the others.
So you're saying that the Jewish people have been able and have been faithful in validating the scriptures.
First of all, yes, Judaism was this way, but not all of it. So there is a very interesting prophecy here, which is in Revelation chapter 11, and it's the prophecy about two witnesses. That's talking about here, which it says in Revelation 11:3. I give power to my two witnesses, and they'll prophesy for 1,260 days in a sackcloth. I don't want to get too much into the different meanings of these two witnesses, but Definitely one of the meaning, which is, very important meaning, is it concerns the scripture, particularly the Torah or Pentateuch is called a testimony or witness, and also the gospel is called the witness. That's how John calls his writing, the testimony about Jesus. And so during the time of papal Rome, which is the time of Antichrist, which is 1260 prophetic days / years, they were neglected. They were in sackcloth. They were trampled upon. And what happened after that is very interesting. It says here that as they finished their testimony, so at the end of this period of dominion of papal Rome, it says that the Satan is going to kill them. And that's exactly what happens in the end of 18th century. French Revolution was the final blow, but the entire 18th century is the formation of what is called this Age of Enlightenment. And in this Age of Enlightenment, it questions the authority of the church. It questions the authority of the Bible. And so when we come to the 19th century, everybody views the Bible as some kind of a fairy tale. Was there ever an Exodus? No, that's a fairy tale. Was there ever Moses? No, Pentateuch was written and by different, it's just a fairy tales. There's different 4 sources and all kinds of stuff. Was there actually a flood? No, it's a Babylonian myth. Was there actually King David? No. Was there actually a conquest of Canaan? No, it was all. So the Bible was turned into shreds, and some of the Christian theologians were describing it like, well, Bible is lots of myth, but they help us when we need it in a time of serious stress and death and illnesses and so forth. So the Bible became some kind of a fairy tale, which is only Christian, and the authority went down the drain, if I would say. And so, but the Bible prophecy and Revelation 11 continues. It says then what happens now in verse 11, now after 3.5 days, the breath of life entered them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. So we see what the book of Revelation chapter 11 describes to us is, first of all, the Bible is literally killed and trampled down, but then the Bible comes up alive. What happens? Why the Bible comes up alive? The key factor in revitalization of the Bible and validity of it as a historical book is the biblical archaeology. Today, if somebody tells me, oh, I don't believe the Bible is the true book, I don't believe that the Bible is something historical, I'm going to just tell this person, go with me to Israel. Go with me to Israel. And so when I take him to Israel, I show him, look, this is what's been excavated. This is what's been excavated. This is what's been excavated. In fact, and the history comes alive. I can stop.
And the history comes alive. So what you're saying is people who have doubts, when they go to Israel, or even just, do their research online or whatever, and they see that these scriptures and these artifacts have been validated by actually, which organization is it in Israel again?
Oh, there are so many archaeologists and scholars.
Yeah, but there is one specific organization that validates a lot of this stuff. But anyway, when they see that the Jewish people have preserved this and the Jews validate these artifacts, etc., are you saying it increases their faith?
Oh, absolutely. This is just, let me tell you that much. Take, for example, the belief that the Bible is an ancient document. The Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1948. That's the year of creation of Israel. Without a special effort from the government of Israel, these precious scrolls that contain, for example, a 2200-old full copy of the book of Isaiah, which is exactly, like the one we read today, 2200 years old, without a special efforts from the state of Israel, which went on a limb to recover these scrolls, preserve them, and on and
And
on.
so what you're saying is another reason why Seventh-day Adventists and really any Christian should support the state of Israel is because it helps preserve the scriptures and the validity of monotheism and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Without Israel today, Christians and Seventh-day Adventists included would not be able to validate 90% of what is in the Bible as historical.
Okay.
Let me throw in another point here on kind of a similar related vein. I have often thought, Seventh-day Adventists believe that the final conflict before the return of Christ will involve a controversy over the Sabbath and which day is the Sabbath. Well, I've said for years that if somebody tries to pull that on me and tell me, well, Sunday's the day, not Saturday, my answer is very simple. Who do you think you're talking to? We Jews have been keeping the Sabbath forever, long before you ever got here. You can't tell me which day is the Sabbath. And of course, years ago,
we didn't clarify for our viewers earlier that the three of us are all Jewish people. We're all Jews. We're all Jews here, guys.
And we're all Seventh-day Adventists. But
Seventh-day Adventists.
I mean, years ago, I was on a major talk show in Los Angeles on a Friday afternoon of a holiday weekend, and the host, who I don't believe is still alive, before the final break, he says, when we come back, we're going to ask our guest, Seventh-day Adventist minister Alan Reinach, why Seventh-day Adventists keep the Sabbath. So I had a 2-minute commercial break that I'm praying and thinking about how the Lord, promised the gift of the Holy Spirit. And I come back and I said very simply, well, God rested on the, God rested on the seventh day. Jesus worshiped on the seventh day. We follow the example of Jesus. Very, very simple. The reality of Sabbath without the Jewish people, it's up for grabs. Why is Sabbath? Why is Sabbath important? That God set apart a particular day. But Sasha, I want to turn to something you and I were talking about, in planning for this program, and it's something that's very near and dear to my heart because, when I did an undergraduate course at State University of New York on the Holocaust. And I did a paper at that time. I was a believer. I was an Adventist at the time. And I wrestled with the question about why. Why is it that God would permit such a tragedy? And how, does and this whole topic that we're talking about, did God reject the Jews? Is that why? And what I came up with was that because the Jews were chosen, and because they have been faithful, they have been the special object of satanic hatred for centuries. And the history of anti-Semitism, the history of the Holocaust, shows the satanic hatred that has been leveled against the Jews. So, for starters, do we want to take Satan's side on this, or we want to take God's side? Satan's side is to want to destroy the Jewish people because they are an ongoing witness to
They
the
are an
reality
ongoing witness.
of God.
Yeah.
We are, right? So you pointed out in our conversation about why it's so important that we recognize and acknowledge the historical circumstance of the return of the Jewish people to their ancestral home in Israel. And I'll let you speak for yourself on that one.
Yeah, we have to be very balanced when we describe the significance of the state of Israel as the Jewish national home, because indeed, in majority of Christians, they believe that the state of Israel has, significance in the last day events, because some believe that Jews will rebuild the temple and the Antichrist will come. Others do not connect Jews with Antichrist, but believe that Jews have special place in the process of salvation, and there are one path to salvation is to the Jews, and the other path to the church or to the Christian. But we, as a Seventh-day Adventist, don't see it as biblical. I don't see anywhere in the Bible any promise to restore the temple. It makes no sense. And of course, the Bible teaches that there is no other name under heaven with which one shall be saved, and it's the name Jesus. Otherwise, why have I chosen to believe in him, as well as you, Rachel, and Alan? But the question which we need to see is this. There is a very interesting text, prophecy, in the book of Isaiah, which shows a very particular message about the Jewish people. In Isaiah chapter, in Hosea, I'm sorry, book of Hosea. In Hosea chapter 3, verses 4 and 5, it says, "For the children of Israel shall abide many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred pillar, without ephod or the teraphim." Then it says in verse 5, "Afterward, children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king." So this is interesting, because Hosea lived about two and a half centuries after King David was dead. So what kind of David are they going to seek? The question is. And of course, we know about Messiah, the son of David, whom they're going to seek. And it says, "They shall return after many years without king or prince." So basically, this prophecy definitely points out to God, who will restore the statehood, the national home of people of Israel, to help them seek God and seek their Messiah. When Alan, you referred to the Holocaust.
And guys, we have about 5 more minutes. Just
yep. So when Alan, you refer to the Holocaust, this was a big shock for Jewish people. Many Jews who were religious Jews, believing in God Jews, after the Holocaust, they just said, "We can't believe in God anymore. God betrayed us. God is no longer with us." And it's really, really unfortunate that sometimes I hear from some Christians and even Adventists, yes, Holocaust was the time when God really punished people for basically not believing or rejecting Jesus, which is the biggest satanic lie. Number one, it is for those who heard this awful nonsense. Just a little historical fact that first Jewish people who actually perished in Hitler's Germany were Jews who were members of Christian churches. Because during the Nuremberg laws, back before the gas chambers, Hitler specifically put it into Nuremberg laws that Jews must be expelled from Christian churches that they are members of. Only few minority of Christians, including a famous Christian preacher and bishop of Lutheran Church, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, refused to do it, and he died in concentration camp for this. So Jews who were believing in Jesus, they suffered in Holocaust. Number two, there was a few years ago, I heard a really, really touching presentation about the work of missionaries in Warsaw Ghetto and how many Jews, before they actually were burned and destroyed in death camps, they accepted Jesus as their Messiah. So this is the biggest fallacy to say that God sent Hitler to punish Jews for what has happened 2,000 years ago. Even Ellen White speaks very clearly that Jews who live today, in her time, it was even before the Holocaust, have no responsibility for what happened 2,000 years ago. But what is actually happening after the Holocaust? Again, I studied this issue personally because when I lived in Portland, we had 7 Holocaust survivors. And we asked each of them when we heard their testimonies of presentation, do you believe in God? They say no, except only one person who believed in God. 6 did not believe in God. So this is what is called post-Holocaust theology, and it's a reality.
And so that post-Holocaust theology is twisting our brains and infiltrating Adventism. And the reason we did this video today, what is that noise? Okay.
I don't hear anything.
I definitely hear some feedback over here. But the reason we did this video is because we're trying to start the process of undoing that theology. And it's not just post-Holocaust. It goes, before the Holocaust as well. But Pasha, why don't you wrap us up with the Jewish Jesus and Israel for our last reason to support Israel?
Well,
Yes.
but let me just finish because where Sasha was going with this is the state of Israel. As you know, after the Holocaust, Jews had nowhere to go. And it was an act of divine grace and mercy that they were able to go to Israel. And, for many, it is, just a sign, a blessing that there really still is a God in heaven. And for us as Adventists, not to be able to relate to what a profound spiritual blessing it is for Jews that God has given them a homeland. I think it's really tragic. It's a complete lack of empathy and compassion to kind of take this out of historical context and out of the spiritual context of the history after the church has treated the Christian world has treated Jews so badly for more than 1,000 years.
And
right?
then we wonder, gosh, like what's wrong with those Jewish people? Isn't it
And
so obvious? Don't they read the book of Isaiah? Isn't it so clear to them that Jesus is the Messiah? Like they're just so blind.
well,
Yeah,
and
and
Germany was a highly Christianized country in, in the 20th century. So, I just think that the church needs an awful lot more humility, and we as Adventists as well, and a lot more compassion.
Yeah, a lot of but for compassion takes education. And I think it's been really hard for a lot of Seventh-day Adventists to agree that we need to help Israel keep their homeland, because what have they preserved? They just reject the Messiah. And so I think once we start to view the Jews in a more positive light, they are our spiritual parents. They gave us the gospel, they preserved the scriptures, they wrote the Bible. And that appreciation grows, then there becomes a bigger desire to help support them as they've supported us.
and one of the important issues which we need to take into account, that first of all, as Jews were asking, where is God in this Holocaust? God's response is, here I am. And he opened the door for the state of Israel to be for the state of Israel to be created. And so this is why, by supporting Israel, we as a Seventh-day Adventist do support Jewish people and acknowledge Jewish Jesus, and acknowledge that the church in its core was originally Jewish, and the Gentiles came in and grafted in. And also, we support the true biblical historical narrative. With this war which is going on today, there are many reasons for what has been happening today, but one of the prominent key reasons that I observed for the past 30 years is basically a false historical narrative. When I take tourists to see Jerusalem, and one of the places I take tourists is called a Temple Mount. So it is very sad for me, but that for some Muslims, the word Temple Mount is sound like an offense. If I say it in front of any Arab person in Jerusalem, he will be seriously offended and angry at me. And I'm very saddened about this, because what this person who calls himself or herself Muslim is offended about, it's against the Quran. Quran always acknowledged the existence of Ibrahim, Musa, Suleiman, Dawood. These are the Arabic names for Abraham, Moses, David, and Solomon. But unfortunately, there are some factions among the Muslims, specifically those who are responsible for keeping the Muslim holy sites on a Temple Mount, which present totally unbiblical, unquranic historical narrative, saying that Jews never lived here, temple never exists here. If I go as a tourist on a Temple Mount and I bring my Bible with me, they consider it as an offense, as a crime. If I say in front of the people, there was a temple, and they hear me say it, their police is gonna escort me out of the Temple Mount.
Yeah, and like you were telling me earlier, if the Muslims take over Israel and the Jews were to ever lose it, the Muslims wouldn't even want archaeological digs because it's just further proof that the Israelites lived there and owned that land. And if they did find anything, they would invalidate.
Not all the Muslims,
not all of them.
but it is very interesting that today those who support this kind of views, the biggest supporters of particular of these ideas happen to come from especially European liberals. And who are the European liberals? The European liberals go back to the 19th century, and they're the ones who destroyed the authority of the Bible. So
no, but you were telling me earlier today over the phone about how if the Jews were to lose Israel and Muslims were to take over, they would invalidate.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't say Jews lose Israel, but if Israel, I would say this, if Israel was not created, the Dead Sea Scrolls would be lost, and many archaeological excavation would not have taken place, and we wouldn't have this solid biblical proofs that we have now because of the state of Israel that supports all these explorations and excavations, which not only prove the legitimacy that Jewish people lived in this land, but it also proves the validity of the Bible for anybody who believes in the Bible. But the second point, which I see coming and visiting Israel very regularly, and this particular war is very sad because so many groups I know came and they were stranded in this situation right there, looking and exploring the biblical sites. Basically, what I see, Jewish people in Israel are no longer uptight about Jesus because the excavation not only demonstrates that King David was there, that ancient Israel was there, King Solomon was there, and all other interesting facts from the Old Testament, but they also uncover the fact that Jesus was there. And unlike this aggressive faction of Muslims who denies the existence of Jewish people in the Palestine, Jewish people in Israel are absolutely fine to present to any tourist the evidences of Jesus walking that land.
So give you the top, sum it up for us, Sasha. The top 3 reasons why Adventists should support Israel as a nation that they should have this land.
Well, number 1, by supporting State of Israel, we support Jewish people and acknowledge that Jewish people were in the foundation of the New Covenant Ecclesia, the New Covenant Israel, the New Covenant Church.
That they are our spiritual parents.
Yes. Number 2, the State of Israel has the biggest contribution into the resurrection of the validity and authority of the Bible. If we support Israel, we support the truthfulness of biblical history, historicity of Moses, and absolute historicity of what Moses, David, Isaiah, and many other prophets walked, and historicity of the fact that Jesus walked and existed on this earth. And number 3, by supporting the State of Israel, we extend mercy to the people who suffered tremendously in a time of Holocaust, and following the advice of Isaiah, comfort my people, because only through comfort and mercy Jewish people are and will be accepting their Messiah, as the prophecy of Hosea suggests.
Thank you so much for bringing up that That beautiful text again in Isaiah, comforting my people. Yeah, obviously everybody is a child of God. The Palestinians are children of God and they're suffering, but the Jews, it was never their intention for the Palestinians ever to suffer. And we're going to talk more about that in our next video on conspiracy theories about it. How did we say that? Conspiracy theories about Israel, Sasha?
Yeah, but we call our second video conspiracy theories about the creation of the state of Israel.
About the conspiracy, and we're going to be tackling those conspiracy theories in our next video.
Yes, that's
okay.
You know, I think, Rachel, it's important before we close,
Yeah.
at least to point out that our discussion here has not been political, right? It's been fundamentally theological and missiological, really.
Yeah.
Obviously, in a time of war, which is what we're in now, innocent people suffer. And as a Christian, you know, we don't just have compassion on the suffering of some innocents and not the suffering of others. So, you know, it's even hard to know how to address that. But you know, lest some people want to come away from this saying, well, you know, does that mean that you cannot be critical of actions taken by one side or the other? No, in fact, the American Jewish community is far more critical of Israel than, you know, pretty much anybody else. And, you know, it's because of our love and our desire to have a thriving democratic nation, and all of the challenges of you know, of being a democracy in a place where you're constantly under threat of annihilation. And Americans cannot wrap our brains around what that experience really is. So, you know, I just want to be clear, the conversation we've been having, we're not trying to get into the issues around the war itself.
Yeah, exactly. And that would be, yeah, we're the Hebrew Bible Institute. We focus on the theological aspects of the Jewish people and Jewish history and its relationship to our church and our denomination. But yeah, that's right. We need to pray for Israel, and we'll also be praying for the Palestinians and God helping them, as they obviously, most of them don't want this war going on right now. Thank you so much, Alan, for joining us today. I hope you can join us for our next video. We don't have an exact date and time for the next video, but we will certainly be announcing it in advance as soon as we know when that is. Thank you guys all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Pastor Sasha. Your insight is invaluable to helping us to understand these issues.
Thank you.
Well, yes. God bless you guys, and we'll see you all next time.